Hi, folks. Welcome back to another episode of On Call with Insignia, where you go on call with leaders innovating the future of Southeast Asia's internet and digital economy, or as we like to call it, Asia Innovation. I'm your host, Paulo Pina. And with us on this call for today is the co-founder and country head, Singapore country head of Aspire, Joel Leong. So very happy to have him back. Personally, I haven't been able to catch up with him in a few years now since we first met in Singapore. So it's great to finally have him on the show as well. Thanks for coming on, Joel.
Hey, thanks for having me, Pablo.
Yeah, it's gonna be great to catch up again after a while. But just a quick note on Aspire for those who are new and hearing about the company for the first time. So very much all-in-one finance operating system for businesses across Southeast Asia. They do a lot of banking and financial management services for companies of different sizes. And a lot of, I would say, a lot of milestones this past few months for Aspire, celebrating 5 years for one. Also just recently raised 100 million US dollar Series C round. Also listed as one of the top 10 fastest growing companies in Singapore, the Statista Nikkei list. Also a LinkedIn top startups for the past 2 years, 2021, 2022. So definitely a lot of recognition under its belt. And also more importantly, they've been serving more than 15,000 businesses across the region. So enough about Aspire. I want to talk first about Joel and let our listeners know more about you and how you cross paths with this company. Because as I understand it, you yourself have been, starting companies even before you joined Aspire as co-founder yourself. So maybe you can share a little bit about that and how, one thing led to another, how you met Andrea, who's CEO, and Giovanni, co-founders of Aspire as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again for having me. So I guess prior to Aspire, I did run a couple of my own startups, mostly in the e-com space. We ran initially a marketplace, and then it later also evolved to a crowdfunding / food buying website. I would say they got to sort of decently successful stages where they were, you could say, ramen profitable. But I kind of also got to a point personally where it wasn't something that I invested a lot of time in it. It wasn't something that I saw myself doing for sort of the next 5 years. Starting to see a lot of movement in other industries like fintech. At that point, I think a lot of e-com players had also entered the Southeast Asian space. Lazada, Amazon were really starting to kind of become mainstay names. So yeah, I started exploring other opportunities, and that was kind of how I stumbled upon Aspire. Then I kind of remember still going down to the office on a Friday
What's your first
evening.
impression? What's your first impression of the
My first impression.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. So back then we were in the office in Oxley Biz Hub. It was in town in CBD, and there was a certain vibe to the office, I have to say. Like there was certain energy that, it was scrappy, but you could tell that things were happening. There was a pace, there was movement. That was my first impression. And it was interesting because I could actually observe it for a little while, because I think Andrea was a little bit late to meet me. So I just sat in the office for a short while, like looking
Right.
around. Yeah, that was the vibe I got. And yeah, I ended up having like a 3-hour chat with Andrea that
Right.
evening.
What convinced you? I mean, like after that 3 hour chat, like was
Yeah.
there anything that they said, or was it more external things that influenced your decision?
Yeah, I think it was a couple of things, to be honest. I think definitely that chat had some influence. It gave me some confidence in, having not just a reputation. At the time, I think Andrea also had his success at Lazada
Right.
before. Giovanni also obviously had his successes in his own startups before. So there was a certain reputation that these guys had as well. But I think, being able to speak to them definitely helped to validate that. It was not just rep, but like there
Right.
was stuff. But at the same time, like I shared fintech as an overarching theme that was starting to really gain momentum at the time. So I was interested in the space. And lastly, as a business founder, startup founder myself, right? I could empathize with not just the immediate solution that they were providing at the time, which was credit, right? And that fit very nicely with the whole crowdfunding side of things that I could see. I could see a real need for people starting up to need credit. But I think also the larger mission of the company, right? Which was that businesses are really underserved financially, in not just in credit, but even the basic stuff like your banking account or financial experience, right? There was a lot of opportunity in that space, that low-hanging fruit that could be plugged. And I think the mission of reinventing business finance spoke to me.
And now it's been more than 4 years since the day you dropped by the office and felt that energy and had that CR chat with Andrea. And certainly, I would suppose you yourself have grown as the company has grown. So maybe you can. This is a fun question that I've recently started to ask our guests. Maybe you can describe, what your journey has been thus far in some numbers for us. 3 numbers specifically. How would you describe your journey so far?
That's a good one. If I had to choose 3 numbers, maybe the first is 2018, right? It's the
Right.
year, right? Where I think it's really ground zero, right? It's interesting. Like that version of the company still remains very fresh in my mind. But it's that scrappy startup spirit, which is very different from today. So that definitely is one of them. The second number is probably 10,000, because I think the point where we hit 10,000 users, right, was a really sort of internally a very strong validating moment for us. So I remember that number top of my head. Third number, I don't know, maybe what's to come, maybe. I'll leave it blank, or
A
maybe
variable
infinite.
X or infinite possibility. Yeah, I guess infinite is a good way to put it as well. You mentioned with 2018, you said that what you had encountered in your first days there in the company still remains with you to this day. Maybe you can describe a little bit more of what that is, and what hasn't changed in the more than 4 years you've been growing with the company.
I think so much has changed when I look at these 4 years, right?
For sure.
Maybe one thing that hasn't changed is it hasn't gotten any easier. But no, I think in all seriousness, I think what's really interesting about a startup is that it can always be ground zero. It can always be day one, right? I think literally you're just building many more startups along the way. If you think of startups as like problem solving, right? Then that's what you're really doing. And I think the difference between like starting a startup versus like scaling a startup is just simply like you're building more startups. And you maybe need to make sure that they all make sense and they're cohesive and they fit together.
That's a great way to put it. Sort of like a meta, a meta way to see the world. Bigger startups are just really like a combination of a lot of smaller startup, problem solving decisions that have been made. And specifically for this call, I wanted to zoom in to one of those, I would say like quote unquote startups, if I could call it that, is really the community building initiatives that you guys have been doing more recently. It's something we normally see in a lot of like B2C brands and consumer platforms. But for B2B, like a SaaS fintech company like Aspire, it's pretty interesting to see it done at this scale, right? And a lot of different initiatives that you're doing. In particular, 2 of the initiatives, the Entrepreneurs of C, Southeast Asia, and the CFO Connect. Maybe you can start first with the Entrepreneurs of C. Maybe you can share with our listeners what that initiative is for those who haven't heard of it yet, and what the motivation was behind this. And maybe you can also frame it into the whole like community building sort of ethos that Aspire has.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I think Entrepreneurs of C is really a community of founders in Southeast Asia, right? I think at the heart, that's what it is. But I think the root story behind this is what was really interesting. And I think part of it was actually inspired from Humans of New York. There's this series, a really great photography series. But I think, when we ourselves as founders really identified with a certain aspect of startups, which I think is a little less known or seen to the public, right? So I think the public generally has a perception that startups are like glitter and gold, and that's because the media feeds them the success stories, right? You hear these big companies, you hear this story of from zero to hero, right? But the reality is that, I know that any startup founder or VC, right, knows the real numbers behind this sort of ecosystem, right? And the reality is that it's just not quite as optimistic as the media puts it, right? And I think when you're really in this journey, there's so many ups and downs, right? Like the mental resilience, the level of fortitude that's required to be a founder, right? Whether you're successful or not, it's already an achievement on its own, because it's very often a very lonely journey, right? And I think when you contrast this with the perception that the public has created in social media, right, has kind of like created a world where people are only allowed to celebrate their wins, right? You have to shape things, where you have to say things as if you're successful. And I think that was really the genesis of this community, where we wanted to provide a platform for like really human stories of entrepreneurship to be shared, and to say like, hey, yeah, we acknowledge that it's not that easy, right? And that's okay. And that other people just like you, right? And that's a proud badge to wear. So that was how it came about.
So it's a community. There's a lot of content also being created around it to be able to share those stories that you mentioned. And I also wanted to frame it in the context of the business as well. Was there a North Star like for this like community that you were building? Like any specific kind of results, business results maybe that you wanted to see like come out of this initiative?
To be honest, I mean, there is, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you're a business, right? So there is. When we first started, honestly, like one of the interesting things though, before I jump onto the business side of things, is that like a lot of these guys were actually like our friends, right? Like, I mean, they're fellow founders, and like, I mean, that was what was really special about creating this community. Cause like, I mean, all of us had somehow journeyed on this together for the past, 2, 3, 4 years, right? And doing various things, and in trying to make impact in society with the businesses that we're creating. So that was very special. But on the business side of it, I guess you can say that maybe a North Star is kind of like community numbers, right? The organic growth of the community. And it has to have value in order to like continue to grow again, right? With people wanting to join, creating content within that community. Today we have like a Telegram group that like, is vibrant. People are continuing to put stuff in there in a safe space, right? So that's kind of the North Star for us today. If you want to measure it from a business perspective, obviously, campaigns like that can bring your brand top line awareness. You can also use a community to be a group of like super users or ambassadors for your business, where you can test new products, get feedback, and so on. It can be a win-win, right? But like I said, I think the non-business gains from this as well, right? Where like I think in the larger picture, like, building a supportive community, knowing where entrepreneurs of C started from, right? The ability to just let other founders know that they're not alone. I think that's building the ecosystem as a whole, and I think that's valuable.
Was it easily sort of embraced by the rest of the organization, or was there some initial kind of like pushback?
Not at all, actually. I think, to be honest, when we first started doing it, I don't think there was too much thought or emphasis internally about it at the beginning, right? No one knew that it was going to like resonate so strongly with folks. So, it was just kind of like another brand campaign we did. It really took off and had a life of its own.
And so like, since you started this campaign and this community, what has been the biggest learning so far? Specifically, how has this taught you to then run the future communities like TFO Connect, which we'll talk about in a bit?
I think the biggest learning is about being genuine, and being genuine about providing value to your community or your audience, right? I think that's the only way it works. And each community kind of values different things, and you kind of need to figure out what that is for each community. But it's definitely not one of those things where you should just do for the sake of doing it, right?
Moving on to CFO Connect, which started last year, a much more recent one. Maybe you can share this time, what was the context for that one? Why CFOs in particular? I guess the reason must be obvious given what you guys do, but then maybe there's some, I guess, story behind that, and what you have been looking to achieve with this particular community.
I mean, here again, to be very transparent, I think there's, on one side, there's a business driving factor. After this first Entrepreneurs of C took off, right, we realized like, wow, this is actually a valuable tool for our customers, a valuable tool for the business, right? As our product offerings evolved and started serving finance leaders around the region, thought as well, right? Could there be value in creating something community for finance leaders? The idea was there. It wasn't really quite clear what shape or form that would be, what value we would bring to that community. But I remember like along the way, as we were thinking about this, like it was a very interesting time for the world of finance leaders, right? If you think about it, for a long time, I think the background context is that I think finance or finance teams, right, have literally been back office functions, right? They kind of are like tucked away, hidden in a corner, literally in the back office, right? In a corner. But I think what has occurred in the world in the last, 2 years, right, is 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 a very different time that perhaps might change this, right? So let me explain. So like first there was COVID, right? Which really caused like businesses to like execute massive changes in the way they operated overnight. And then that followed with this, macro climate where like your interest rates are soaring, right? Then you have the tech winter where it's not about like top line growth anymore, right? But sustainable unit economics, foundations, so on. I mean, basically, businesses have had to readjust themselves multiple times in these 2 years, right? And I feel like all of this kind of brings finance back to the driving seat of the business because there are a lot of financial decisions here, right? You continue to operate overnight during COVID. What do you shut? What do you change, right? And then like tech winter, what okay, no longer top line, right? It's bottom line. What do you change, right? And all these you actually need the right data and you need the right analysis from your finance teams to actually guide you. So that was kind of the backdrop. And with this community, what we felt we could do, right, was we wanted to do two things, I think. One was to celebrate the role of finance in business, bring them back to the driving seat, bring finance leaders into the conversation with the business leaders as they should, and to drive the business forward. But I think the other thing was also to also provide an opportunity for finance leaders to learn from each other. A lot of times, finance topics are, for good reason, kind of behind closed doors. And that's why sometimes they're even kept in the back office. And therefore, the opportunity for them to connect with one another, other finance leaders with the right level of discretion, but behind closed doors, is an opportunity for them to grow and to bring the industry forward.
Yeah, I really find that point interesting about because normally CFOs, obviously the information that they deal with and the scenarios that they deal with is very contextual and sometimes very secretive also to the company. It's not something that many would be very upfront and transparent with. So it's interesting how you guys have sort of tried to balance that and still provide like a safe space for CFOs to interact. And in fact, like my colleague Alan was in one of the events that you guys recently held and spoke on the panel. So it's been great to also see that Ting has been a part of it and in some way. And I was wondering, you do all this content, you have these panels, which I mentioned earlier, to share insights to CFOs. But is there anything that you yourselves at Aspire have learned from the CFOs that are part of your community?
Yeah, what we learned, I mean, in our conversations with CFOs and building up this community, and we have like all these, closed door events and the sharing is quite phenomenal. I think what I saw is that firstly, they should absolutely be in the driving seat. CFOs are extremely effective business leaders when they're equipped with the right tools and the right data, right? The other funny thing is that they should be spending time on like high value analysis instead of chasing receipts, which kind of is a pet peeve of theirs. And then maybe the last one is I would say that I've also learned that they're also human, that they operate just like any other team in a business, right?
Not some black box. That nobody knows.
Exactly. It's like a black box, but in reality, these guys enjoy playing golf. They have management challenges of their own. They're always looking for like better ways to do things and finding new tools and solutions, just like any other team.
I think like a thread that we've been sort of covering throughout the conversations about Entrepreneurs of C and CFO Connect is again how this ties back to Aspire as a business. And you've like touched on that a bit, but maybe you can sort of share, has there been any challenges in making that link and how you overcame those challenges and really tie things together?
Yeah, I'm really surprised because one would think that like initiatives like this may require, certain buy-in from other teams to get the resources to conduct stuff like that. But for us, the tie has been very natural, thankfully. We kind of think of it as like we exist to provide value to the customers we want to serve. And that can come in many forms, right? It can come from the knowledge that we share, the product that we build and they consume, or the communities that we create. And I think at the end of the day, all of these things still push towards the mission, right? Which is to empower these businesses. So somehow it's been easy, actually.
It seems like it's very much like a no-brainer for you guys to actually have embarked on these initiatives. So we'll get back to community building in a bit, but I just wanted to shift gears also and talk about how your journey in Aspire has impacted your own worldview, having been a leader yourself of other organizations prior to Aspire. and also a founder. Is there anything that you've had to like unlearn, let go of biases or things like that as you've grown as a leader in Aspire?
Almost everything, right? It doesn't, I mean, the learning doesn't stop. And I mean, I take comfort in that the quality of the problems are getting higher. In terms of what else has changed in my worldview, maybe the topic of, not that I haven't prioritized this or that the team has not prioritized this, but I think, you really see the difference in an organization that's aligned in terms of its mission, in terms of its culture, and that impact that is multiplied, right, when your numbers grow. I think it's a problem that is a lot less visible when you're a small organization. As you grow, like, that becomes, I mean, it's kind of the number one thing on my mind these days. And I think also the nuances or the things that you learn, right, in kind of trying to shape the alignment and the culture to have that impact.
Yeah, I was actually curious, like, since you mentioned about alignment and culture, what do you do, like, personally in yourself, like, as a leader of a specific team within Aspire to actually, like, align, make sure that the people working with you are actually aligned with the direction of say, for example, if you do an event for CFO Connect, how do you rally them and tell them that this matters to the bigger picture?
I think a lot of it is communication, but I think it's also about creating the available touch points for that communication, right? Like, do you have kickoff calls that align everyone? Do you have weekly updates to relevant stakeholders so they're not, like, kept in the dark? More and more, it's sort of like looking for opportunities like that. How can you, continue to make that alignment more robust?
Giving everybody their chance in the driver's seat, in the passenger seat, not just leaving them in the back office, I guess, to borrow your visual.
I think that's the only way it works, right? I think that's really the only way it works. I mean, one of our core values is ownership, right? And that's really how we operate. Because I mean, how else do you do things when you have an organization that's 400 large?
Right. And finally, I wanted to ask about the future, and specifically, I wanted to contextualize that within the communities that you currently run at Aspire. Like, how do you see the future of these communities, in the next 5 years? Are there any particular segments that you're thinking about creating communities for in the future, or like how are you planning to deepen the communities that you already have with the CFOs and the entrepreneurs of C?
Yeah, I think we plan to continue to invest in these communities. I think a lot of the way we see it working is as much like our goal is to get it to an organic state, to a point where we don't have to be as hands-on, and there's a lot of value that community is getting from within. That's kind of the goal. Obviously, playing the organizer role in this, we obviously have certain avenues or events that helps everyone get together. But yeah, I think that's kind of where we hope these communities can go on to.
They become sort of their own sort of organism.
Yeah.
And speaking of communities, that leads me into our, Minute Masterclass corner, where, we get to hear about specific advice on certain programs or initiatives or functions. If you were to do a masterclass on running community building initiatives, especially for B2B, maybe some founders out there are thinking like, why should I maybe even consider this in the first place? Maybe not just even invest, right? But even just think about whether this matters to their business or not. What key takeaway would you want for these, entrepreneurs or founders to have when it comes to that?
If you're coming at it from a business perspective, I would ask two questions, right? Does it make sense for your business? And as a subset of that, which part of your business? Is it an awareness piece? Is it an engagement piece? And so on. You need to answer that for yourself. And secondly, like, can you provide value? Are you in a position to provide value? Because I think if these two ingredients are not there and they're not aligned, then probably it's not the best strategy for you, and there's a lot of other things you could do. But if these two make sense, then probably you could explore it.
Yeah, I mean, like Aspire obviously started these communities not from day one, right? You obviously needed to have a presence and a brand and all of that to be, as you mentioned, I think that's a really important point, or a position to provide value. So on that note, we go into a rapid fire round, moving on from the more serious questions to some fun stuff, some chill questions. So first up, what digital technology innovation excites you the most today?
I guess the compound answer is AI, right? But I'm especially interested in how the impact of AI would have on humans sort of like 10, 20 years from now, which part of the human mind does it accelerate? Which type of skill in the workforce does it accelerate versus like which ones get replaced? I find that very interesting, and I have many debates about that.
Right. Maybe a topic for another podcast, I guess. If you were to produce a Netflix series, what would be the title of the show?
I saw something today that I thought was interesting. Maybe I'll just use that. It was from the actor Tom Hardy actually. Passion produces results.
Passion produces results. Looking back now, what is a skill, could be a soft skill or a hard skill, that you believe you should have learned back in your time as a student?
Failing.
And then if there was something that you could automate in your job just by wishing for it, what aspect of your role would that be?
So I really wish that I guess it's kind of like Neuralink, right? I wish that like whatever I'm thinking could be typed onto Slack instantly and like sent, so that I just need to go through stuff and like think and reply and that's it, without actually having to do, any typing, screenshotting of stuff and moving everything around. If my mind could be translated into an output, that would be nice.
Right. Okay. Yes. I guess another note for Elon Musk, I guess. What's your favorite go-to destination in Southeast Asia, or any trip that you're looking forward to taking in the region?
In the region, interestingly, I find Malaysia really interesting.
Anywhere
Um,
specific in Malaysia?
Well, not anywhere specifically, because what I like about Malaysia, strangely enough, is that you can drive there, and I enjoy the road trips. I'm not a speed driver, but I spent some time in the States, and like I enjoyed like taking these road trips. And somehow from Singapore you can do that in Malaysia.
Right. So from
And I
Singapore
find
to Penang
find
to
Malaysia
KL, like just
no,
go
and I
up the
find
whole.
Malaysia a really rich country with lots of resources, right? Like I mean, they have like amazing beaches, amazing mountains. It's an abundant country.
Yeah, actually, not many of our guests have mentioned Malaysia, so thanks for giving Malaysia its shout out. And the next question is, what's your favorite activity to de-stress?
These days, tennis.
Anything you've read recently or taken up recently that you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
I'd love to recommend like taking up a new skill. So like during COVID, I took up sailing. I mean, it was completely new for me, but like that perspective of being at the age that you're at and learning something completely new doesn't happen quite that often anymore, right? Like you used to learn lots of new things when you're young, but to take on something completely new, and like I fell in love with it. So that was really refreshing.
Right. Is there anything, like now that you've done sailing, is there anything on your checklist that you want to get to if you have the chance or have time?
Oh, there's lots. Maybe skiing.
Okay. Yeah, so definitely still like moving from one point to another. I sense a theme here with the road trips and the
It
sailing.
isn't, right? Because
Yeah.
I mean, spend so much time like seated where I am right now.
Right.
Definitely believe a lot in like in balance and in your health. Not doing the best job of it right now, but can do better.
On that note of finding balance, I'd like to thank Joel for coming on the show. It's not that often that we really talk about sort of community building here on the show, and especially how it relates to a company like Aspire, which is fintech and B2B, which is pretty interesting, and hopefully takeaways for any entrepreneurs out there listening who are thinking about what community means to their business. In the meantime, thanks so much for tuning in on this call, and thanks again for coming on, Joel.
Hey, thanks for having me.